Welcome to Yoga Chat with Nikki, the podcast that explores the practice of yoga and life beyond the practice. And now for your host, Nikki Estrada.
Hi, and welcome to Yoga Chat with Nikki and Greg. Topic for today is yoga, injury, and healthy range of motion and aging. And I've got two incredible experts with me on the body, athletic people who are both in healthcare profession. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. This is Pali Cooper.
Pali Cooper, I'm a chiropractor and I practice here in Corte Madera. I also am a yoga practitioner. I've taken yoga teacher training, although I'm not teaching yoga, but I am very athletic as a person, and yoga has been very important to me in order to stay healthy.
Got it.
So my practice as a chiropractor is more of a hybrid because I do a lot of soft tissue work and a lot of functional movement, and I do work with a lot of various yoga teachers and see yoga injuries.
Yes, okay, so you're actually seeing what's happening on a regular basis.
Yes.
Great. And this is Michael Feldman.
Yeah, I'm Michael Feldman. I'm a manual therapist. My formal training is that of, I went through the Rolfing Institute, 1990. So I'm into my 25th year here of doing body work. And I too have done a number of yoga trainings, as well as Pilates, CrossFit, Feldenkrais. Just try to have a mixed bag, depending on the tools that someone might need to come in the door.
Got it.
I was working with a lot of structural imbalances. Often those lead to injury. Mm-hmm. And yes, the yoga community, like all other focused physical forms, all have their signature injuries that can stem from overuse or underuse. So I'm here to sort of help
add some opinions.
Yes, add some opinions, help fill in the blanks, connect the dots.
Excellent. Okay, so what I wanted to really talk about today, I mean, there's a huge amount of topics I want to hit on, but the one that's been kind of brewing in my mind for a long time now is, in America, we're very much focused on the physical aspect of yoga, and there's so much more, but when we hone in on the physical piece, what I see, certainly in the media, is a lot of emphasis and focus on advanced posture. On getting into those super deep back bends, your feet to your head or beyond. Incredible range of motion in terms of the hips, feet behind the head, that kind of thing. And I'm just wondering how healthy that really is. And I know for my own body, my own structure, I've moved through whatever degree of muscular tension I had, and for the most part, by my late 20s, I was about as flexible as I was ever going to get. And to continue to push those limits of flexibility, and we see those images that kind of encourage the average person to want to go that deep, they may not have the structure or the body to do that. So I'm just wondering how healthy that really is. And as we're aging, I'm wondering if more and more of the yoga community who have chosen to kind of push hard physically in their 20s and 30s and maybe even 40s, are we going to be suffering? Are we going to be in pain? From repetitive movement, basically, from a lot of repetitive movement. So I'm wondering what your opinions are on that. What do we know in terms of the human body and healthy range of motion?
Well, there's a couple things that I could say. That one of the important things when I look at yoga, it's not about a certain posture or pose, it's about your body and your alignment in that body, and honoring your alignment and honoring your own personal anatomy, because that varies so much with people. So one of my favorite teachers is Jiri Kumplek from the Czech Republic, who is one of the Prague teachers. And he would always talk about, he was in his early 20s, spent time in India, and teaches yoga from a different perspective, very much alignment-based yoga. So that my yoga would be very different from Michael's yoga or your yoga, because I have to honor my body. And so if I go beyond what my range of motion that I can maintain stability, I'm going to have a problem. And I think that's what happens, is that I look at you or the yoga in a yoga studio, someone wants to do what you're doing, but they don't have the capacity to have the balance of stability and integrity within that pose. So that's where you come into problems. If you go beyond what you're able to have integrity with alignment and stability, you start to wear and tear on the joints. And you can see that, and I see that.
How do we know that? How do we know that before it's too late?
Well, I think that one, having yoga teachers that understand this and can help coach you, because honestly, even with my awareness, I go to yoga classes with good yoga teachers so they can help just with little minor adjustments. But I think ultimately, it's like the way that we teach yoga with a way of mindfulness, so that it's not, no pose is empty. You're not just going into a pose to make a shape. There is a mindfulness to it and an awareness that you learn. When things are lined up perfectly, it should be almost effortless. When you're breathing and you're tensing and you're struggling, already right there, I look at that, the breathing and the style of breathing, that it's too much.
Very much. Emphasis on breath for me in my class.
Teaches you a lot. Your breath is your teacher. And really reminding people about the diaphragmatic breathing. I know in yoga there's many types of pranayama.
Yes.
But what we're talking about for every day is very much diaphragmatic breathing. And there should be just a steady breathing. It can be a little bit rapid when you're effort, but it should never include the neck and tensing. And you see that people compensating when they're not able to do something. If they don't have the right stability, they will compensate. And those compensation patterns is what we see in everyday life, not just yoga, but that's where you start to have problems.
What would you add to that?
Oh, plenty. It reminds me, I was assisting Jean-Claude West at the Yoga Journal conference in San Francisco a few years ago, and he made a comment to the class, and he said, how much are you willing to compromise someone's structure to achieve the aesthetic of the pose? And that just really rung home. It just really stuck with me. So when I'm addressing yoga teachers, that's one of the questions that I pose to them. And you go into a class and say there's 20 people in the class, and we'll say there's 20 poses. One of those poses is going to be contraindicated for every single person in that asana. So there's that has to be addressed. In education, I think in your question, like how do we know? And it's education. Not all yoga teachers are manual therapists.
Right.
They're not connective tissue experts, or they're not structural
anatomists.
integration.
It's like understanding anatomy. But I think that when you look at the effort someone's going through, and it must be challenging when you have a big room full of people. That exactly what Michael's talking about. There's going to be somebody who's going to start to compromise so they can do the same thing the person next to them is doing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I think one is educating people at the very beginning, which I think really good yoga teachers do, that this is not a competition and this isn't about a shape. This is about being mindful in your own body that you can feel. And there's an art to that. There's an art to teaching that, but there's an art to just in terms of the general public understanding that. Because I think we do get to be, it's very competitive. Like if you're doing something that looks extraordinary, I want to do that. And I think that is part of our culture that we need to just, when it comes to yoga, that doesn't fit.
Yeah, I mean, it challenges me even, because I see the photos, of younger practitioners in extreme shapes, and I think it's great, it's beautiful, they look really beautiful, and they do probably have a certain amount of breath control and poise, but I just know that many people equate that with yoga, that is yoga, and exactly what you said. It's a trap.
Well, I can tell
they're going to quickly compromise anything and everything to get there.
I can tell you from a personal experience, I've treated several very prominent older yoga teachers who have major issues now because
Tell me about that.
So one, I'm not going to use any names, but one, a lot of paresthesias and problems with the neck from doing headstands at a young age and not having the strength. So it was done over and over and over in India. Now a headstand can be so beneficial. It's one of my favorite poses.
So you are not anti-headstand. As a chiropractor,
No,
you are
not at all. I love headstands.
That? Okay.
I love headstands. But And you always say, well, should there be pressure on the head? Yes, but it's balanced with this. I like a tripod headstand, and it's equal through the upper. You have to have the strength and stability to be able to do that. Do you have
a percentage, you say, like the amount of weight on the head versus how much in the upper body, shoulders?
You shouldn't really actually be feeling very much, because when you start to feel this, it's already over. It's over. Yeah. It's so I think that this is one of the poses that could take many years for someone to learn to do correctly.
Yes.
And there's ways for yoga teachers to teach that pose as a headless headstand for many years.
Yes.
Many years. And some people may never really be appropriate.
They may not have the structure.
Right, the structure and the strength. But so this is one example that I've seen late.
Okay, so she spent, I'm assuming it's a woman, many years early on in India on her head without the proper strength, and now
has degenerative disc issues and neuropathy. Another friend of mine, because she's extraordinary flexibility and back bends for, and the back bending was all coming from one part of the lumbar spine.
Yes.
When you look at those poses or those positions, it should be an equal amount of movement.
Yes.
And our thoracic spine tends to get stiffer and tighter. And so instead of working on balancing that mobility, people just hinge at their low back.
Yep.
And you can see it, it's painful to watch, but what happens with the structure is you start degenerating the disc and you start to have major problems. So I have seen that with prominent yoga teachers who now are very specific about teaching alignment and backing people off from a pose that may seem extreme, even just a full wheel, because the hinge is coming from one part of the low back. There's no benefit to you. There's no benefit to your body to do that pose.
Right.
When it's
and if
hinging.
Anything
it's hinging, you're going to hurt yourself, and you may not feel it when you're 25.
Right.
But by the time you're 40 or 50, that area will no longer tolerate any of that.
Right.
So we want to prevent that by educating people. Yoga teachers, but also students from understanding when somebody teaches them something to back off, that's really for their benefit.
Right.
Even though they can do the pose.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a big one, is even though you may be able to do it, how healthy...
The quality is not good.
Well, the progressions, and working with people with movement, there's always progressions. So until you can do this is off the table.
Right.
And I consider down dog to be a rather advanced pose. Very few people have the shoulder stability or the sense of pelvic stability and a sort of neutral spine.
And hamstring mobility, right?
Length.
Yeah, and that, I think that lends itself to, and worked with a lot of dancers, and dancers have a very similar pathology as with the yogis, where they become hypermobile.
Yes.
And someone's like, well, come on, let's show us your back bend. This is, and when those people have hypermobility, the tissue tends to lock down. When the tissue's locked down, there's a reason. So going in and working on your flexibility. I'm going to loosen my hamstrings. Well, chances are there's a reason those hamstrings are tight.
Exactly.
So maybe some instability in another part of the body that's protected.
So the tissue is then
trying to protect.
Fascias coming around.
The fascia
All right, so let me ask you though, because I just had a family trip to Disneyland. A lot of walking all day long. And after 2 days of that, I did some yoga in the hotel and downward dog, and there's another thing, but let's stay on course here. So downward dog was stretching my hamstrings. I could feel the tightness. In my mind, it was beneficial because I wasn't forcing it, but there was resistance, and I was pushing on the resistance. And I feel like that third day of walking throughout Disneyland and running to rides and stuff, I felt fine.
So you were talking about two different things. So with downward dog for you and getting that lengthening through the posterior chain, all of the muscles of your hip and your hamstring and the calf after walking, and getting that elongation is beneficial for you. What Michael's talking about are people that are so hypermobile in their low back that the hamstrings are actually trying to protect. So the tightness isn't real tightness, it's a compensatory. So it's
not just from walking around.
Right, from walking around. For a lot of people, and people like you, and people like me, it's like I rely on down dog after traveling and sitting and walking. It's like part of my personal repertoire for my own home practice. But he was talking about something else. You can't assume that every time somebody has a tight hamstring, it's something that you just need to lengthen or stretch out. It could be compensating, and usually compensating from some core instability. And then,
as an individual, how would you be able to differentiate that without going to an expert?
The average person probably cannot.
no, well, you felt
Right?
good after. That's one way.
And then we're kind of
Yeah.
back to the
Yeah.
education
Yeah.
and empowering the teachers to, again, the breath is a great, the diaphragm's it's the mediator between the physical body and the nervous system. The diaphragm is always going to respond when one of the two is out of touch.
That's why we all sort of started with the breath, is what
Yeah.
the teacher in yoga or in practice, you look at how the breathing is. And when somebody's really efforting and you see the breathing changes, but when you have the balanced diaphragmatic breathing, that is when you know that the movement quality is intact.
And there's presence. There's
Right,
mind
presence. It's
there.
mindfulness.
Mind.
Mindfulness, because yoga as a pose is empty. But when you go into it with mindfulness and you're constantly tweaking and feeling your breathing, that to me is where, they talk about yoga stilling the constant fluctuation of the mind, but part of it is that practice of being
Absolutely.
present
Yeah.
in your yoga practice.
I'm always saying that to students, just because you're in down dog doesn't mean you're doing yoga.
Right.
The pose isn't the yoga.
Right, you're not just hanging out
Yoga
there.
is the mind.
Right.
Are you evaluating? Are you listening to that feedback that, oh, that's enough?
Right.
Pause, breathe, that's enough. Or are you just barreling through and
Right, but back to
ignoring?
that pose as a yoga teacher, you could see one down dog where somebody needs to back off a little bit because they're so flexible and maybe shorten their dog a little bit,
Yeah.
or somebody else can lengthen it,
Yeah.
or somebody is too much kyphotic in their mid-back and they need to elongate, or somebody, there's so many things in that pose for each individual. And like Michael was saying, for some people it's too advanced, but for people that are able to do it, even that, there's a constant thing that you're working with. The hand position, the weight,
and even
the
day to
shoulders.
day.
Day to day, from minute to minute. Right.
If you've been walking or hiking, your body's going to be very different that day
Right.
than if you've done 4 days in a row of yoga and day 5, wow. blood
Right,
is
so
flowing in a
so
certain way.
like for athletic type people, like I could go for a long bike ride and like my hips are so tight, so I feel like I'm never getting flexible because I'm always tightening up. But it's the balance of that. If you're going to be athletic or you're going to be working the muscles, you want to then be able to have resilience. You don't want things to just get tighter and tighter.
So I'm wondering statistically, I haven't seen any statistics, but the manuals, the Hatha Yoga manuals were written 1,000 years ago or so. There was 20-something, 30-something poses in them. We've now gone to hundreds and hundreds. It's said that in the 1900s, when the British occupied India, there were the Mysore Palace, and there was the yogis, and there was the gymnastics going on, and that's where we got all the handstand stuff, because that isn't.
Traditional yoga.
No, we don't see that in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika and those texts. So here we are, fast forward 1,000+ years later, and we've accelerated the physical, and we've accelerated the amount of poses and the length of time we're doing the poses, and we're living to 90 or 100. So are we moving ourselves, and you've said there's a few yoga teachers are we going to be in pain as we age? What do you think, Michael? You see so many people, I'm sure, in your practice who come in with yoga stuff, or even just the CrossFit thing, all these other athletic types of challenge that we're doing physically. Are we going to be hurting?
Any
70s.
Any repetitive motion, be it yoga, cycling,
Iron band.
Repetitive
it
stress.
doesn't matter. Whatever. If you pick something, I'm going to do this method, you'll be injured. And people don't get injured from overtraining or doing something too much. They get injured from undertraining, where they're not doing.
Not addressing their weak points. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Simply put.
It's
Yeah.
imbalance.
Yeah. So there's an imbalance there. The laxity of the joints. So in the yoga industry and the older yogis that I've treated as well, they created a laxity. There's no stability
Yeah,
there.
that's my body. I can go that route quickly.
And things that are performance-based. They're not awareness-based.
Yeah.
I think that's a little missing ingredient. Like you said, even if we're in yoga class and you're there to get in touch with your body, to lengthen the breath work, the holding of the breath, or the shrugging of the shoulders.
Yes.
I'm trying to get to the pose.
Yes.
Like you said, they're missing the point.
I think the thing with yoga too, because I'll say the other side, as I get older, I can't imagine not having a yoga practice. And I think that yoga, when applied with integrity and respect for alignment, is probably one of the best ways of maintaining some resilience in the body. It's strengthening, you're working on flexibility, stability, it has everything. But
moving the body in all directions.
All directions is three-dimensional,
Yes.
and balance.
Right.
So balance, awareness, strength, flexibility, core, breath, it can all be there. But it has to have those components in a way that's well balanced and honors my particular body today. So yesterday I could do something, but today my balance is a little bit off, or whatever it is I have to be honoring that. And I think too, with yoga teachers, I think a more seasoned yoga teacher understands sequencing a class that prepares the body for something, and that I think that's underestimated how important that is.
Well, I mean, I teach the Yoga Works method trainings, and we are all about the sequencing. And
That's good to know.
We talk about it as component parts. Like we never just throw a pose in for wouldn't that be cool to do crow right now? You need to do the build-up of component parts.
I'm really glad to hear that.
To prepare someone to
Another example of progressions.
Yeah.
Progressions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You do it in simpler, more broken down, easier postures, so that 45 minutes in,
your body is prepared.
You're ready to put all those recipe ingredients together and do the more complicated pose. And as a teacher, hopefully you're trained to see, the kyphotic back or the neck. No, you're not going to bear weight on your head and neck.
Right.
You can't hold a plank. You're collapsing plank. No, you're not ready for headstand.
Right.
But half of it, I think, is the education and the teacher constantly saying, not only is it okay, but it's right that you listen to your body. Because even if we're trying to set the stage for all the the right ingredients for an optimal peak pose, there's still going to be that tendency for people to ignore.
Well, and I think because yoga's so popular, and people getting a yoga teacher training in a weekend or 4 weekends, and can you really understand alignment and anatomy and be able to see when somebody's not honoring that? If you're a brand new, not to say you can't, you could be somebody who's very experienced, but you can also have somebody who really doesn't understand, especially when they're younger and haven't had an injury or seen injuries.
Yeah.
Circling back to this idea of extreme poses.
Yes.
That's so off the course of what Pali's talking about. That presence here. To your back bends are only as good as your lumbar curve.
Right.
And that lumbar curve goes, the pose is over. Doesn't matter
Right,
how
and
the
the
aesthetic
thoracic
of it.
spine, it's like opening that. I see that. I think that's kind of epidemic culturally anyway, because we do so much sitting and we have so much tightening here. And so if I'm going to go into a back bend, it's like that ultimate end is not really what the point is. It's like preparing the body and opening up in the body in ways where the resistance is, but it's not to go past that to be in a certain pose. And that's what the extreme poses do. And for someone who's young and can do it, creates a lot of laxity, who doesn't have stability.
Right.
But for someone else, they're going to get hurt.
I'm just laughing. It says the young that can do it. It's like we'll be the judge of that.
Right, because the
How
quality,
even is
well,
the
the
back
quality
bend
is
or-
horrible.
Right,
And I've seen
right,
that. It's
right.
horrible. You look at it and they're in, you
see the
look
crunch
at
in
it.
the middle of
Oh,
that.
and it's like all at T12 and you're like, oh my goodness.
Well, good examples of that are just the cover of yoga magazines.
Yeah,
And you
yeah.
see the covers of these magazines, and as a body worker, it's horrifying that that's what's being put out there as a sort of a poster stamp of,
Want to achieve.
I'd love to do that. I
I
did
wanna
that
look
when
like
I was
that.
11,
Yeah.
so maybe I can do that again.
Yeah.
and it's not reasonable,
Well,
and
there's-
it's not safe. It's a little,
I
it's
don't
irresponsible.
hear anybody. I don't really, that's not true. There's a couple of teachers who I hear from. But by and large, I'm not hearing a lot of teachers talk about healthy aging in terms of their yoga practice and acknowledging that, gosh, no, I can't do at 50 what I could do at 30. But gosh, I'm a vibrant, balanced, healthy, successful human being. Right? I
I'm
don't
sorry to hear that. Maybe your voice will help
I hope
infiltrate
so.
the yoga community.
There are some teachers. There are some teachers that are out there. Shout out to Annie Carpenter, who's, I believe, in her 50s, and a dancer and a super smart anatomy yoga teacher. And I know she's out there saying, yeah, I can go down to splits on the floor, but I don't anymore because it's not good for my body. But I don't think there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of the yoga journal covers of, no, yoga's when you get your feet to your head. And it makes me concerned about.
And where are the older models, or where are the men?
Yeah.
Or the men.
They don't sell the magazines.
They don't sell the products in the magazine.
Yeah.
So there's another layer of some of the challenges that yoga faces.
How much do you guys believe that mental belief is core to one's physical capability?
Good question.
There's no separating the two. You don't separate them ever. That the mind-body concept is not a concept. It's all, and we can trace that all the way to pain, like on how people interpret pain. There's wonderful research out now. Being a connective tissue aficionado, and the research about pain is that it's all in your belief systems. If something isn't trauma-based, you haven't been hit by a car or fell out of a window, and you have pain in your body, there's this, what's the model? The biopsychosocial model. So as a practitioner, you want to factor in, their ethnicity, their socioeconomic impact, their family dynamic, their job, how they grew up. All these things are reflective of how you move, how you interpret what your body's doing. So pain is
pretty.
So what would you recommend to a lay person to balance the desire to surpass the current mental limitations?
Well, I think sometimes that brings up fear too, because in yoga there could be certain poses or positions you're in that create fear. It's like balance or something. And I think that what I recommend, I think that when you're doing something that's not beneficial for you, your body starts to hurt. So I would also say that there's a difference between feeling kind of something feels tight and stiff and I'm finding a little bit more range of motion and I'm breathing through it, but I feel tightness, versus, oh my gosh, that's really starting to hurt. Now it's burning.
Yeah.
Then you have to
Electrical.
stop. So I think, how do you explain that? And I talk to that with patients. Do you know the difference between pain and stiffness? Do you know the difference? Because people that I see that are athletes or athletic, will have various things that go on with them that they work through, and most of it they can work through, but there's a difference when they're causing harm and they're causing injury. And I
It
think-
goes back, it's the listening.
Yeah, the listening.
Pain is a signal
We
for
said that.
change.
Discomfort is very
Pain is
different
good.
Discomfort is different than pain.
than sharp, like
Right,
about to
burning,
tear something.
right.
Yeah.
It's rarely a threat.
Right.
Pain in the body is rarely a threat. And the difference between, one of the things I go over again is the difference between being tight and being held. So people will be held, and that's an emotional thing. That's a psychological profile. So they'll be, I'm in my pose. I can keep the pose, but I can breathe. It's like nothing's changed in the pose except now they're breathing. So you get in your own way.
So what I keep hearing from both of you, as a lay person with no real anatomy knowledge, if I just stay tuned to my breath, that's how I could see where...
That is a really good sort of measure, because your breath teaches you a lot. And when things are in alignment, your breath is steady, you're breathing into your diaphragm, you get good abdominal three-dimensional breathing. When things start to tense up, the shoulders go up, or the compensating patterns of the breathing, or it gets really rapid and labored, and that teaches you a lot. Because when something's out of alignment, you're going to start feeling more labored, or when you're afraid, and then when you let that go,
The psychological
the
piece.
piece, exactly. That, oh, I'm okay, I'm here, I can do this.
You know, as a rolfer, there's a 10 series, and the very first session is freeing the diaphragm. And I don't want to, there's many famous quotes is no matter what the issue, do the first session. It's just freeing that breath. It just connects the pelvic floor to
So why is it that people can't breathe? Why is it? It is a phenomenon that's pretty much like Americans don't breathe.
Well, and if you look at it, so if you
human
look at
beings.
how a baby develops, I've done a lot of work with developmental kinesiology in the Prague School. So the very first thing with establishing diaphragmatic breathing is also stability, that when a baby goes to roll over, and that stays steady. But as we go through life, and if your posture is like this, it's really hard for me to breathe into my diaphragm. So if I'm sitting like this, I'm going to breathe here. So then I get stuck like that.
Right.
Or the opposite. So I think that over time, and then just like Michael was saying, the diaphragm is actually a muscle. So if you're not using it and not expanding it, and it starts to get tighter and tighter, you're still going to breathe. We're not going to like stop breathing.
Right.
We live. But it becomes so compensated.
Right.
And that, I think, is cultural. If you look at, we get faster pace, we're sitting more, things get more intense. So you're going to
Stress.
breathe, you're stressed, and you're going to breathe here. And I think when you see stressed breathing, it is all compensated breathing. That's kind of funny, that's like my first session with people all the time is breathing.
Yeah.
And it's just establishing diaphragmatic breathing and getting the breathing pattern, no matter if it's a wrist injury or a neck or
So it can
ankle.
come from the physical, it can come from the psychological, it can come from like repetitive stress, so you shut down physically and you're not breathing. It's kind of
Right,
like
and
which
it
comes
and it
first.
impacts
and
all of those things,
Yeah.
because it's not just breathing isn't just about respiration. Breathing also sets stability, and it's also about calming the nervous system.
Yes.
And those shapes, the stress will trap itself in the connective tissue. So you wind up being stuck in that shape. So if you're a side sleeper, and then you
Yes.
eat breakfast, then you drive in your car, and you sit at your desk, you're in this stress, this posture, adding stress, so it embeds itself.
So tell me more about what we know about connective tissue, because there's been this wave, in the last 5 years of what is the method of the rolling? There's a number of different methods.
Yeah.
The melt method.
Fascia.
Yes,
Yeah.
fascia. I recently took a class and wow, that was really good. I'd never, laid around. I don't know if you've done that, Greg, rolling on balls and like getting.
Yeah.
You feel really silly at first that you're like rolling all over the place on these balls, but you feel this nervous system. So tell me, what do we know about the connective tissue, and why is that a new wave in the yoga world?
Well, first of all, it's the most abundant structure in the body, and it was ignored forever.
Mhm.
Even there's still medical schools today where they just cut it out and throw it away so they can look at the good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Its connection to the nervous system begins in utero. So the connective tissue is part of the nervous system.
Okay.
So everything is wrapped.
And connective tissue, like what exactly is that?
Essentially it's a matrix. It's a weave.
Is
So
it the same thing as fascia?
Fascia is part of that.
Fascia is connective tissue,
Okay.
but not all connective tissue is fascia. So when I teach what fascia is, I talk about it as the stuff in between everything. So
Okay.
all of the organs, all of the structures in the body are wrapped.
Got it.
We hear about myofascia. We've got myofascial release.
Yes.
Which makes me kind of chuckle because it doesn't release, it just changes its shape.
Okay.
So everything has a weave. So blood is connective tissue and bone is connective tissue.
Okay.
So the bone will have a really super tight weave, and then the ligaments will soften a little, and the tendons soften a little, and the muscle.
Yes.
So depending on the function.
Yes.
The fascia is the stuff in between. It's the connective tissue that does not have a weave. It's in a constant state of adaptation.
Okay.
So it's the fascia that tells the connective tissue what to do.
Okay.
It's a communication system.
Okay.
So when you're walking down the street and your foot hits the ground, it vibrates all the way through all the think about a puzzle. Like if I held up a puzzle here, it'd be, oh, that's a pretty picture. And then you get closer to it, and you see, oh, it's a whole bunch of pictures. You see the
Connected.
squiggly lines.
Yes.
So I can get to any picture in that picture through those squiggly lines. That's the same in the body.
Got it.
So the space between.
So if you look at an anatomy book, we were just teaching a class last weekend to practitioners, and we use anatomy pictures from visible body, and it looks like this muscle's here and this muscle's here, and it looks like there's a space there, and it's like in reality, there's no space at all. It's all filled in with connective tissue and fascia.
That's all going
So
to be
it's all-
communicating.
It is, and so it can happen over time. Some of it kind of shortens or adapts, and so what you were feeling when you were rolling around, you're increasing blood flow and circulation, and
I felt
Fluid-
nervous system.
fluid exchange.
fluid exchange, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it was like a self massage, and
But it also reminds us why you can't compartmentalize body, it's all connected.
Right.
So if somebody has restriction in their ankle, let's say you have an old ankle strain and there's restriction there, and you try to go into a certain yoga pose, but you don't have that mobility to do it, so then you're going to probably compensate at your knee. So then you have knee pain, but was it the knee's fault or because the ankle was restricted? Or the same thing with the hip. As the hip gets tight, you're going to probably compensate in the low back, but is it the low back's fault? So it's really, there is a connection in the body, and there's a balance between joints that should be mobile and stable, and all of that is connected. And the communication system of the fascia is really important, and the connective tissue,
Yeah, the fluid state.
the fluid state.
Is essential. And this is where the techniques of foam rolling, and there's a variety of compression. So with the tissue, you can address that tissue by either stretching it or compressing it. And part of this research that's out is that compression is much more effective. If you're taking charged tissue and stretching it, you're only gonna make it angry, and it'll contract back.
So for like the average person that wants to integrate a little bit of this into their daily practice, would you say the balls or a foam roller, or what would be a simple way that somebody could add on to anything they do, whether it's CrossFit or running or hiking or yoga, that would give them another tool for health and ease in their body?
Well, I have a bias to the melt method.
You like the melt method.
The Sue Hitzman put in 15 years she has behind her. It's all, I don't like this expression, research-based or science-based, but she studied with some of the premier fascial researchers on the planet.
And she developed her particular
And
method.
she wanted to create a system that recreated manual therapy techniques. So following her system verbatim, it's the same as there's different manual therapy techniques. So I'm going to get my hands, I'm going to go cross fiber, or I'm going to pin it and ask you to move. All these things are reproduced.
Yes.
So, and using a soft foam roller versus a hard foam roller.
Okay.
In layman's terms, the soft foam roller is going to push fluid through the connective tissue. A harder roller is going to push blood through the muscle tissue.
Okay.
So if you're preparing for an event, you probably want that muscle nice and
Got it. So you want the
operable.
harder.
But on a daily practice, you want
Soft.
to do soft, and it just allows the tissue to adapt. So putting a hard surface on that tissue, the tissue is going to just get the heck out of the way because it feels threatened.
Right. It's deeper.
Just fluid
So do you
exchange.
have an upcoming melt workshop?
Yeah, there's one here every month. I should know that date. Mike'sBodyShop.org.
Mike's Body Shop. Check his website.
And I also offer workshops on connective tissue and fascia, how to treat it, what it does.
So because I am a soft tissue specialist too, and using active release techniques or hands-on techniques really to release that, but I love to have somebody like Michael to refer people to then to have tools for self-help, things that they can do themselves. Sometimes it's really good to give people a jump start and they need help kind of breaking things up and realigning, but then it's nice to have their own
Something that you can
do on your own every day.
Self-care.
Self-care.
Yeah. Well, it kind of sounds like as we come to a close here, there's a couple of big points that stick in my head. One is the breath, right? Let's all remember to breathe and find a teacher that's encouraging you to breathe.
Diaphragmatically.
Diaphragmatic. Well, Well, yeah, I guess you can technically not diaphragmatically breathe if it's stuck, but full movement is what you're talking about. when
Well,
you say
no, I think
diaphragmatic.
there's no substitute for diaphragmatic breathing.
But isn't any breath ultimately the diaphragm's moving?
Not
It's
in the way that's the
intention.
most, yeah.
Any
Full
handshake is
movement.
a
Yeah,
handshake. but-
what you want is three-dimensional.
All three dimensions.
So the rib cage is actually expanding to the side, and you feel like you're not having this compensating
Up here.
over here, yeah.
So full belly,
So,
diaphragm.
breathing, and I think honoring principles of alignment with yoga is
Breath,
essential.
alignment, and isn't it really listening to your own body?
Awareness.
It is.
Self-education
Awareness.
and awareness.
Awareness-based movement
Mhm.
as
Is
opposed
essential.
to aesthetic-based movement.
And
Exactly.
and honoring your limits, right?
Mhm.
Honoring that
Staying
your
with that.
body is
Yeah.
changing
Yeah.
daily.
And I would add to that, identify your limits and then honor them. So
I
you
love that.
always
Right.
you always want to go to that edge every day.
Right.
And then, oh, all right, that's me.
There it is.
So within that,
Okay.
yoga could be for everybody. It's not like it's limited to the flexible people or limited to, yoga has a place for everybody if you honor those principles of listening to your body and honoring those limits.
I
And
love
having
it.
good yoga teachers.
Hopefully. I mean, we're all growing and learning, and my education continues, but I hope as a teacher to always encourage people to listen to themselves and breathe and accept that it's all always changing, and we are all getting older,
Mhm.
and hopefully the goal is happy, healthy, balanced human beings.
I like that.
Thanks you guys so much for the
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
So
you,
your
Nikki.
website, michaelfeldman.com?
Mike'sBodyShop.org.
mikesbodyshop.org, pollycooper.com.
Mhm.
You can get a hold of these two amazing people, and we'll have you guys in the credits too.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Good.